Hi, I'm John Levensold, and in this video what we're going to do is we're going to refactor our index.php file, clean it up a bit, and make it a little more usable for other parts of our website, because we're going to have more than one page, and we certainly don't want to have to repeat ourselves when we want to create things like this, top level, I'd like to call it a header. And we're going to push this code right here that we've created in PHP, and we're going to create a method out of that, and then we'll be able to call it in a cleaner way. So let's just get started. First thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create some more PHP tags. Now, this might seem a little confusing at first. In fact, why don't I just delete these PHP tags? Now, the coloring is all messed up over here, but that is going to change very quickly. So I'm going to make a variable here, and I'm going to call it header. And I'm going to use a single quote. It's very important to use, if I'm going to use the single quote here, that means that everything inside has to be a double quote. And so now we've got this header equals, and all of this is a variable. So if I hit save, you'll notice that I've lost essentially the top part of my web page. However, I can just echo the header here, and we're back in business. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method out of this, or a function, called render header. And render header is going to do just that. So instead of the header variable here, I'm just going to say return. And it's going to return this giant string. So now all I need to do is hit echo and then render header. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create a language. So echo render header to me makes a whole lot more sense than looking at all this gobbledygook over here, basically. So I can just look at my index.php file and see render header and know exactly what's going on. Now I'm going to move this stuff into another PHP file, which we're going to create in our functions folder, and it's going to be called templates.php, where we're going to store all these templates that we're going to be writing. There aren't that many, but still it's a good practice to keep things that are similar together. So I'm just going to cut that, hit save, and put it in templates.php. Now if I go back here, echo render header, now that's not going to work anymore. In fact, I'll get an error, or it just won't show anything, because it doesn't know what render header is. So in my functions.php file here, I'm going to create a new section, which is going to be define references. And I'm going to say require once, and it's going to be templates.php. So this might seem a little confusing, but basically the index.php file, which is the site that we're accessing, is going and it's saying, hey, I need functions.php to work properly. So then we load functions.php. And then functions.php comes along and it says, hey, I need templates.php to function properly. And then templates.php has the actual render header function. Now, the nice thing about all this is that Eclipse is actually clever enough that if we hit Control or the Apple key, it'll know that if I click on render header, it'll take me straight to templates.php. So when you're working with an IDE, these things at first are a little confusing because you're dealing with all these files, but in fact they make more sense because you're starting to build a language and a structure to your web application. Now the other thing is that it's generally not a good idea to just have a title and have the same title for every single header. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say title equals pasta shop. Whoops. And here I'm going to put in title. So now this is still going to work and it's still going to say pasta shop at the top. However, when I say echo render header, I now have the option of putting in a title. So I could say pasta shop catalog, for example. and then we'll see that it says Pasta Shop Catalog at the top. This is just a way of creating something that makes a little more sense in terms of our web page. Now I'm going to do the same thing with this chunk of code over here that I'm seeing, which probably makes more sense if I was to call this function render products from XML. And I'm just going to indent this using my tab key, and I'm going to close that. And instead of echoing output, I'm going to return it. So basically, whenever somebody calls render products from XML, they're going to end up with this output variable. And I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to cut it out, and I'm going to put it in my templates file right underneath here. So now we've got render header and we've got render products from XML. If I go back to my index.php file, I can do echo render products from XML. And so far, so good. All right, so we're getting there. Basically, everything looks the same. That's how refactoring works. Now let's make these buttons at the top a little more appealing. And I'm going to do that by styling. And we're also going to style this table because it's not exactly the prettiest table either. So we're going to do a bit of work on CSS. I'm just going to go back to main.css. And let's start with the nav. So we've got this nav. We're going to give it a bit of padding, maybe a little bit of a margin so that when I save that, so we're going to have a little more space. Now we can already see that starting to look a little better, a little cleaner. And in the nav, if I go back to my template, I'll see that I've got these hyperlink tags. So we're going to go to the nav class and then A, which is the hyperlink. And we're going to set up a color and give it a bit of a border. I like soft gray borders, I have to admit. A bit of padding, and we're going to set text decoration to none, which is going to get rid of that underline. So they're going to look a little more like buttons. So already these look a little cleaner. They look more like buttons now. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a hover. Because if I hover over this now, I don't even know it's a button anymore except for my cursor changing. So I'm going to say nav, a, hover, and we're going to help the users out by just making the background change to white. Whoops, there we go. So now you'll see that it actually changes color. Alright, that's already a little better. Now let's work on this store business. So under render products from XML, we notice that we've got this table and it's called products. So let's just go and start working on that. I'm going to use some comments here. This is the beginning of my store section in my CSS file. Now if my store section got really, really big, I would take that and I would put it into a store.css file. And the same thing goes for pretty much anything else. I like it when things are all in their own little bits. You'll also notice that I'm actually indenting my CSS here. And I do this just so that I have an understanding of, okay, well, the nav A tag is inside the nav tag. And so these rules are being used on top of the rules that I'm seeing here. So they're all kind of being packed on and tacked on, rather. So let's do that over here. So we've got products, which is the name of the table. And I just want to make sure that this is center aligned. That's not too bad. And now if I go back to templates, I noticed that we don't really have an indicator of an actual product and when a product begins. So I'm going to do that here. I'm just going to create another class called product. So every table column, every table cell is going to have a class called product. So in here I'm just going to go product. I'm going to say border 1 pixel solid. And again, a bit of padding. And we're going to specify a height as well. And then you want the image to float left. we're going to set up the price. I'm going through this rather quickly because I figure you can go back and look at the code samples to see how all this is kind of put together. And we're going to have the add to cart button, which is going to display block, and what that means is it will be on its own line. And we're going to set the alignment of the add to cart button to right. So if I refresh this, wow, okay. So we've got $133, $3.99, and $15.99. We need a $sign there, which I forgot. I'm just going to add that in right here. Alrighty, that's a little better. So we've got these add to cart buttons. We've got the view store, view cart, clear cart. And if we go back to our index.php file, it's starting to look more like code again, which is a good thing. The other thing that I want to do is I want to create a footer. That's going to be my last template for this video, and it's just going to be closing tag, essentially what we see right here. So let's go and create another PHP thing here, and we're going to say return and create a function. Call this render footer. I'm going to take that, paste it in here, indent it a bit, hit save, and then we're going to cut this out, go to our templates file, and we're going to just drop that in there. So actually I'm going to take render footer and I'm going to put it right next to render header, and I can actually see how our page is built even though we've got a bit of PHP code in between. So actually, yeah, so this actually works out quite well. So I know that this wrapper div is being closed by this div over here and this body over here, and this way the template isn't going to break anytime. And if I want to change the template, I just need to look at the render header and render footer and change the HTML code there. And if I go back to index.php, all I have to do now is hit echo render footer. Now if I refresh, everything looks exactly the same. This is great because if I want to create a new page right now, all I have to do is put in render header and render footer, and then away I go. So in the next video, we're going to start looking at session and adding stuff to a shopping cart object. Thanks for listening.